Welcome to ADE 401, Study Section 1, The Concept of Trade Union Education. Introduction. In this study session, we will be discussing the trade union education. We will begin by explaining what the concept means. In doing this, you will discuss the three categories of trade union education, which are union education, workers' education, and labor studies. To conclude the session, you will make an attempt to marry the concept of trade union education with adult education. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to define trade union education, differentiate between trade union education and adult education. What is trade union education? Trade union education, a means of teaching workers how to constructively represent the interest of the union. Have you heard about trade union education before now? Does it have any meaning to you? To answer these questions, let us try to define the concept of trade union. The term trade union education has no definite meaning. The concept covers a wide range of activities and which consequentially has been defined in different ways by different scholars from various perspectives. Hence, there is no definitive definition given to the term trade union education. Although the term trade union education can be used interchangeably with labor education and workers' education, yet there are some authors that perceive a lot of differences among these three. ILO 2007 defines union education as the ongoing process by which workers learn how to represent their co-workers at the workplace and in society by developing unions which are effective in collective bargaining, recruiting new members, and taking political action. It further opines that education involving workers can be divided into these three categories. 1. Union education. 2. Workers' education. 3. Labor studies. Union education. The first category we will be looking at is union education. Union education is educational activity conducted by unions for their purposes. It covers functional education, which refers to training members in the operations of their unions, and subject education, which takes general subjects such as economics and applies them to union issues such as fair globalization or enterprise analysis. This will lead us to the second category, which is workers' education. Workers' education. The second category is workers' education, which refers to programs aimed at the educational attainment of working people. ADE 2000 defined workers' education as intended to educate the workers on the contract between employers and employees, particularly the various laws that establishes the relationship of work. It involves programs related to literacy, numeracy, learning a second language, and other general education activities. Having understood this category, we can now move to the last stage, which is labor studies. Labor studies. The third category is labor studies, which involves the open, impartial, and critical study of labor in society as practiced by universities. The term labor education is often used to refer to union education and to labor studies when practiced by a union or university-based educators on behalf of unions. Labor education is a branch of adult education and could benefit from innovations in the field of union education and labor studies. Spencer 1994 submits that labor education refers to education and training offered by labor unions, trade unions, to their members and representatives. The extent to which this education is provided directly by unions or by another agency or educational institution for unions varies from country to country and union to union. The main purpose of labor education is to prepare and train union lay members to play an active role in the union by educating activists and members about union policy, about changes in the union environment such as new management techniques or changes in labor law. Labor education is also used to develop union consciousness, to build common goals, and to share organizing and campaigning experience. These educational rights became increasingly narrowly defined to rights to training for industrial relations purposes. The author sees labor education and trade union education as the same in scope and content for the unions to function effectively in industrial relations, thereby building a vibrant and enviable union. The ICFTU formally set its goals for union education at its 1952 Education Conference in Berlin for the first time, and it stated that trade union education is not an end in itself, but one of the steps in the advance towards the emancipation of mankind. The goal would be reached only when the broad masses of the workers and those representing them are in possession of all the knowledge and experience necessary to change the structures of society and to banish want and fear forever. The statement clearly defines union education as the mass education of workers aimed at changing society for the better. An overview of the three categories of trade union education: union education, educational activity conducted by unions for their purposes; workers' education, programs aimed at the educational attainment of working people; labor studies, the open, impartial, and critical study of labor in society as practiced by universities. Figure 1.2 illustration of three categories of trade union education. A union education can cover these three categories, but the emphasis it places on each will depend on the makeup of its membership, its goals, its resources, the economic structure of the country, and sometimes, in developing countries, the priorities set by donors. Having this at the back of your mind, we move on to discuss the relationship between the trade union and adult education. Union education is defined as the ongoing process by which workers learn how to represent their co-workers at the workplace and in society by developing unions which are effective in collective bargaining, recruiting new members, and taking political action. Going further, union education was broken down into three categories of union education: workers' education and labor studies. The trade union and adult education. Historically, education has often been seen by workers and their organizations as a means by which they can advance their interest in the class struggle with their employers. Trade union education or labor education is just a part of workers' education and evidence that workers' education is broader in scope and content than labor education. Such Savero and Herod 2000 cited Hopkins 1985, who defines workers' education as that sector of adult education which caters for adults in their capacity as workers and especially as members of workers' organizations. Within such a broad definition, he identifies 5 major components which provide: 1. Basic general skills; 2. Role skills for union and workers' organization activity; 3. Economic, social, and political background studies; 4. Technical and vocational training; and 5. Cultural, scientific, and general education. This inclusively covers all organizations that function to educate working adults, being the trade unions, workers' organizations, and government and non-governmental organizations, among others. Workers' education, according to Igbo 2008, covers the aspect of adult education that is the fastest growing part of the Nigerian education system. It provides education that helps workers to maintain their employment status and tackle the challenges of stunning advancement in all disciplines, and as well provides up-to-date information in one special field. The relationship between trade union and adult education. Adult, workers, trade union education, education. From whatever perspective we examine labor education, one thing stands out: it is the education of members of the working class who are also adult, and therefore a branch of adult education with limited scope and involves not only education for awareness but also for skill improvement and attitudinal change, etc. Study section summary. In this study session, you discussed trade union education. You started by giving the concept an acceptable definition and proceeded by categorizing it into union education, workers' education, and labor studies. With this, you concluded by placing trade union education side by side adult education. This helped you to look at the connecting point between the two concepts. This is the end of study section 1. Thanks for listening.